So just as a reminder, your part of fortune is where you can focus to bring harmony to your entire incarnation so that you can bring about the intent with which you took it. Just to remind you, you are essentially an angel or a spiritual being. You took this incarnation, you selected it because it offered you an opportunity to channel the universal will in a certain way that would be useful to you in your development through many incarnations. So the part of fortune aligns your sun, your moon, and your rising sign. And the sun, of course, is where your spiritual self comes through and sort of peeks through your incarnation now. And then the moon is your intuitive animal self that can nurture spirit if worked correctly. And then finally, the rising is your earth, your elements. And by making all three of those in alignment, by focusing, moving from your part of fortune, you bring about success and harmony. If you'd like to learn more about those details, like I go much more deeply into them in a couple of videos, those are linked below. However, in this video, I'm going to talk to you about your 11th house part of fortune. The 11th house is to do with essentially what unites every single human being as an individual. What is that? It is the universal will. You'll hear in a more common discussion of the 11th house that this is the house of friendship. Sometimes people will say of groups because it can be what draws people together. But in the broadest sense possible, the most esoteric sense possible, it is that in virtue of which we're all identical, which is that spark of divinity within, that genius, that lightning, that basically spirit of freedom that are, ideally, and in fact, if we were to be completely living our natural lives, would be brought about. That universal freedom force is what that 11th house is about. So what do you focus on if you have the 11th house part of fortune? Well, again, there are different levels and you have to find what's most meaningful to you at this time. But reflect on or focus on when you're interacting with people, how you can interrelate with that in them, which is exactly like what is in you. Essentially, that in virtue of which there is no difference between you and them. Sometimes this takes the form of social justice movements, of caring about big issues in the world that affect all of us. So in a more exoteric or outward focused person, that's often what that looks like, caring about big issues, being centered in this case in big issues that affect all of us, and serving humanity as a whole through that way. Just as well, though, it can also be about a spiritual ministry, so to speak, to do with ministering to that spark of divinity in each of us. It could also take a much more humble form. People wouldn't necessarily know that you're really focusing on interacting with what in them is the same as what is in you. Depending on what else is in your chart and who you are, it might be unnoticeable, but if you're focusing on that and really centering yourself in interacting with that other essentially as yourself, in that broadest way, and in that sense, always looking to allow that other to do their will before you do yours. So you're always considering will as a universal factor in all of your interactions. If you're always centered in that, you're going to bring about the harmony of this incarnation. You're going to be able to take your sun, your spiritual self, your soul, your instinctual self, and then your body, your elemental self, align those three things so that you're constantly being able to channel the universal will, so well represented by the 11th house, through this incarnation. I hope that's helpful. If you have questions for me about this house, please go ahead and leave them in the chat.